Good morning, everyone. I'm Tina Lin, and I'm a student in English Literary Studies. It's my great honor to introduce Will Harris, an innovative and brilliant poet. Will Harris is a London-based poet of Chinese, Indonesian, and British heritage. In his poems, he uses playful language and covers various topics such as the multiplicity of identity, the legacy of colonialism, and so on. His first book, Ren Dang, won the Forward Prize for Best First Collection and was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize. He co-facilitates the South Bank New Poets Collective and was the 2022 to 2023 Visiting Poetry Fellow at the University of East Anglia, where he helped develop a community-led archive of poets' work. In his most recent book, Brother Poem, Harris constructs a world together with a brother that only exists in his poems. In this way, he discusses the inner struggles and faces difficulties in the outside world. According to a review of the book at the Poetry Foundation, in Brother Poem, Harris is an especially inquisitive close reader of the stories we tell and are told about who we are. I find this very true and find Harris' storytelling very ingenious. Now, let's welcome Will Harris. Thank you very much.
Can you? No, I've got to hold it. Yeah. Hello. Thank you, Donmi. That was amazing. And thank you for being here. Thank you, Dorothy and Collier, for organizing, and Virginia for also fielding a lot of emails from me. It's amazing how many emails it takes to make this happen. I think I would have a complete panic attack if I had to deal with that many emails from poets. I'm really grateful. Particularly being here with Dorothy organizing it, I was remembering when I first started writing poetry, there weren't many British Asian poets, but I had the luck of being part of this mentoring scheme, and I was paired with Sarah Howe, who's was born in Hong Kong but grew up in London, in some ways like me, similar kind of Asian British background, and I was looking for frames of reference, and there weren't really many except for her, but one person isn't really a great frame of reference because you just end up copying them. Sarah put Dorothy's book into my hands, and then that became a really important book for me in navigating how to position myself as a writer, particularly putting together a first collection, because the structure of it, the kind of schematics of it are still in my head, these kind of different modes you can take of kind of self-ironizing and evasion, and it just introduced me to poets who've been incredibly important, like May Burstenberger, and her syntax is still, became a particularly big influence in my second book, actually. Anyway, so really grateful to be here. I thought I would start with the first poem in Brother Poem, which is also the first poem in the handout for me. So there at the back of, just gonna check the time. Okay, at the back of the book, I've got these notes to the poems, but they're kind of obliquely notes. There's a section called Address and Weather, and each part of that is actually a note for each of the poems in the book about some aspect of the writing process. I guess a lot of people don't really like to talk around the poems, but for me, the stuff around the poems is often the most interesting thing, the kind of hinterland, and I get very sad at all the stuff that gets shaved away when you create a book and that gets left out. And so that was my attempt to try and include a bit of that. So I'll read the note first. Each note has a title, which is a little bit of the poem. The Face of England. You suggested a drink, so I met you at the shop. Your shift had just ended. Realizing that it was Brexit Day, we decided to walk in the direction of Parliament. Things were dying down. crowds heading back towards Westminster Station. Then a fight broke out in front of McDonald's. Police officers on horseback dragged a screaming man away. We reached Parliament Square. 2 women were in tears. They stood next to Churchill, tote bags swinging by their sides, and sang "The Service of My Love, the Love that Asks No Questions." I told you I was tired. I couldn't get anything down in writing. I recorded myself speaking into my phone as I fell asleep. The only important word was flagon. So that was something I did for a bit, was just record myself as I was going to sleep, and then I would write in the morning from what I had. And this was one poem that resulted from it. In June, outrageous stood the flagons on the pavement which extended to the river, where we spoke of everything except the fear that would, when habit ended, be depended on. Our fear of darkness is the fear of darkness never ending. To hell with it, you said. And why not? Let's buy a dirty and slobbery farm in Albion. What country is this? There was the big loom we little mice were born to tarry in. Its patter made the bad things better. Oh, we sang against the light as we sang against the battens. Cold that June and mist shapen, the river mind and all else matter. I called you. Where are you? It's getting dark. But these being statements, they ran away before I could say hummock, coastline, theft. I need 1 more hour, please. 1 more hour. This is where we used to speak of everything. My affordable memories sold, I hung my phone from the highest flagpole and kissed the face of England once, discreetly, though it wasn't you, and neither was the mist wherefrom in dingle darkness buzzed a single notification. Call me when you get this. And see, I'm calling now, whether or not this is now or in time. In June, outrageous stood the flagons on the pavement which extended to the river, where we spoke of everything except the fear which would, when habit ended, be depended on. Our fear of darkness is the fear of darkness never ending. To hell with it, you said, and why not? This is where we used to speak of everything. So sometimes I read that poem in different forms, where I repeat it and I mix up different lines. This time I'm just gonna stop there. It feels like it kind of chooses its own form. Okay, I'm gonna read the second poem in the book, and the note to go with it. Yeah, this was a poem I wrote over a long period. Me and a friend did a road trip on Greyhound buses through the Midwest in 2010, and I met someone who told me this story, and he used this particular phrase that stayed with me for a very, very long time. This is the note. It's me. You were talking about losing control of speech. I was in my last year of university. We had heard that on All Souls Day, people prayed for the dead and for souls trapped in purgatory. Near midnight, we sat and wrote poems. The previous summer, I'd made friends with someone in the Midwest. Her mum was also an immigrant. We drank coffee in church as she talked about her brother who died in a road accident. That was when she found God. His wife had become pregnant soon after. She had a little niece. It was a miracle. And now she spoke through me, the moon visible behind the clouds. Yeah, so the significance, the last thing she said to me was, "See you later, cuttlefish." Cuttlefish, which is a phrase I've never heard before or since. Cuttlefish. We were sitting on the floor. I started writing as the window darkened and the grass grew bright. By morning, half the trees were submarine. What was it about being young and wanting to write? You said it wasn't choice. It was dictation. You had to ask. A frog leapt through the cat flap, taking refuge by our feet. You knew I had a brother. Though we'd only met that night. Each time you forget and remember, the experience becomes truer. Like lightning in reverse, the fuse blew. I was stirring a pot of dal, your dog Annie asleep on the floor beside me, snoring. We went to a cafe whose name rhymed with dal, me playing with a small salt shaker, you talking about your brother. He had to go and you were about to go with him, but then you changed your mind. There was an accident that night. 1 second he was in his car asking if you wanted to go and you were about to, and that was that. We were strangers in a circle eating peach cobbler. Someone played Galway Girl on a child's toy guitar. It's me, you screamed. Because you used to live on Grafton Street in Boston. Too late to leave and raining now, we talked about your brother. It was after college that you started writing. Lightning crackled in the air. You were all along me. I watched you heat a pot of dal, your dog asleep beside you. You planned to leave by 23 but changed your mind. To talk with shadows you became a shade. Your eyes were red, you looked like him. I didn't know you had a brother. You had to ask, you don't have to believe. We were sitting on our parents' couch. I said it wasn't choice, you were my brother. We were events in language. The window darkened and the grass grew bright. Can you hear that, cuttlefish? This next poem is called After the Quinine Plant. The quinine plant is in quotation marks to indicate that the quinine plant was a poem I tried to write for many years, and I never succeeded in writing. And yeah, I wrote this poem after I was asked to write something about I guess for an anthology of Southeast Asian British writers, and it was at a point where I really didn't want to write about that subject at all, and I just wanted to write kind of dream poems, but I was glad I wrote it, and it feels appropriate to read it here. But yeah, that resistance I think is in the text. After the quinine plant. The more he thought, the more thinking itself became a source of anxiety, casting its green shade over him mid-sleep, because of what he was and could not be, because of what he did not know he was. London, he knew. It was the other country in him he feared, the oak tree's unseen roots whose tendrils poked out mid-speech. Did you inhale diaspora? Did you choose cliché? No, he said, not knowingly. The more he thought, the more things came back to him, like the myth of the great-great-grandmother who left Fujian on broken feet sometime in the late Qing dynasty, the myth of the living tree divided among her children who became many distinct seeds that when cashed became one currency. The more he thought, the more he had to move, and soon he found himself in Beijing expecting the thud of recognition, but as in a dream he moved differently, walking the hutongs at night, shop after shop, different but the same. He licked toffee apples and drank bubble tea, his feet never touching real earth. The more he thought, the more names appeared, Pekanbaru, Kotobaru, Chiang Mai, places whose names meant something new. And that was when he remembered the quinine plant, the poem he'd spent years writing, then abandoned. And he thought of the plant's long, waxy leaves and white, purplish flowers cultivated by the Dutch as a vaccine for malaria in the late 19th century, when his own Dutch great-great-grandfather worked at a quinine plant in Bandung. The more he thought, the more he needed to return to Peking University's gated campus where, aged 5, he and his mum had lived for 10 months. A guard stopped him at the gates to ask for ID, just as a different man who looked like a svelte Santa Claus appeared and said he was a professor of economics. He'd vouch for him. The more he thought, the less he knew. Sitting beside the artificial lake, a part of him remembered it 25 years before, snowed under, dirty white as swan's down, the other part connecting nothing with nothing as the sun set behind a plate of green smogged. The more he thought, the more he returned to the quinine plant, as a way to make sense of his parents' relationship as a kind of post-colonial romance, which made him its awkward postscript. The more he thought, the less he could extract some life-saving balm from the duress of history, without which, what was the point of poetry? The more he thought, the less order took the form of words to represent the slaughter his family escaped. The more he thought of buckets of fried chicken his uncle brought back from KFC when he worked there in Anaheim in the late 90s, his cousin already speaking perfect American. He saw his uncle's sweat-stained armpits as he praised Colonel Sanders, "Have more biscuit, have more gravy." The more he thought, the more he needed to purge himself through walking at night, inhaling tree pollen thrown into the air by recent rain. So he walked until he had to lie down on wet grass, dreaming the pages of the quinine plant. Buried in a green shade and grown tall with the blood of workers, a violent plant, which occasionally bore small flowers that smelt of milk sweets and made white people salivate, though unfortunately they were poisonous. And okay, I read a very short one. Yeah, that poem compresses a lot of family history into, and in a way that, yeah, maybe I have this. I don't know if other people have. People often describe what I write as dreamlike, but often when you just describe things very literally, they have the appearance of being dreamlike, especially when you're compressing a lot of history into a short space. It just comes out sounding kind of hysterical, as Domi was saying about history. These are from a series of short poems called Commute Songs. Always I am talking to myself, saying things like commute and septum, as if I could outthink the very thought, while in a corner of the screen, a corner of myself retreating, hearing stupid things me said, I wink. How can you grow without having shared your work, lodged in you like an unused parachute, an embolism? Always the voice off-screen butts in. When she died, she fell to earth so quickly, neither the gitane nor wineglass fell from her hands. Veiled and open were her eyes, the fire brigade broke in to find her staring at the wall. But look at me, but you weren't there. You're laughing. Everyone is dead. That's funny. I like reading that by itself. It feels so intense that some people often involuntarily laugh after that. Oh, no, please. Okay, I think just to keep things moving, there's a long sequence called Brother Poem, which are poems addressed to this fictional brother. And I find it very hard to read from because it involves selecting from it, so I'm just going to not read from that. And I'm just going to read something which is a bit newer. I haven't really been writing much since I finished this book, but this is something I wrote in the last summer, so that's fairly recent, and which might be part of a longer project. So over the last 2.5 years, I've worked in care homes or nursing homes. I don't know what you might call them here in East London. That's one piece of context. So part of that job involves making a lot of tea for people. Speaky Stonehenge. I was thinking about it last week as I was helping Kath to her seat, that Stonehenge is stitched into the English national psyche, but genomic research published in 2018 suggests the Neolithic people who constructed Stonehenge and their descendants, who carried the memory of its use, were replaced by beaker people from Central Europe and Iberia over 4,000 years ago. I was thinking this alters the relationship between Stonehenge and its visitors. Though white English tourists might see themselves as communing with their ancestors at Stonehenge, it could be said that foreign tourists encounter it in a way more closely resembling that of Britain's ancestors, as bizarre objects out of time and space. I was thinking this as I was helping Kath to her seat. It is standard to refer to Bronze Age cultures by their styles of pottery, like bell beakers and corded ware. The beaker people are defined by the vessels they used. An analogy could be drawn with language use. Focus on the speaker ignores the extent to which language, a kind of vessel, speaks through us. I was thinking about this as I was helping Kath to her seat, and Frank shouted across the room at me. He wanted a cup of tea. "Speaky English!" he shouted. At first, I misheard him. I thought he was maybe using speaky in a sense that was new to me, indicating a counterpart to the speaker. In my head, Frank was asking me if I was not so much a speaker of English in control of my language as a speakee, someone to whom the language English only flows through. I was thinking this as I helped Kath to her seat. I remembered meeting Gary 4 years ago. He was an administrator at English Heritage, and he told me that a month after his mum died, he'd gone to Stonehenge. He stepped over the ropes and stood in the middle of the stone circle, at which point he realized that it was a monument to our ancestors. He was crying as he said this, so I didn't mention the beaker people. He paused at the word "our" and looked at me. It could have been the association with his mum, the private "our" he'd lost, but that look seemed to communicate a public "our" which excluded me. "I felt that," he said. I was thinking about this last week as I helped Kath to her seat and Frank shouted across the room. I thought of Stonehenge. The speaker stands inside the monument, unable to experience it. Instead, the monument speaks through them. They are the speakee. Thank you.